Hey everybody, what's up? This is Koos, and you are listening to the podcast The Story Behind Time, the show that reveals the story of triathletes who crossed the finish line just before the cutoff time or did not make it to the finish line at all for a specific reason. Today we have Dennis on the show. Dennis is a triathlete from the US who participated at the Ironman in Florida in November. The conditions that day were super hard. The wind made his swim a real struggle. As you may know, the swim cutoff time is 2 hours and 20 minutes. What do you think that Dennis's swim time was? 2 hours, 20 minutes, and 11 seconds. Did he time it correctly? Was he disqualified? Did the Ironman dream die because of 11 seconds? We will figure it out in this chat. Have fun. Yeah, it's great.
You can see all the medals and the flag. Yeah, this is my pain cave. So
Yeah, I'm humbled. I only have a tiny bike and one picture, but you have like a massive studio. Like it really looks awesome with the
oh, thank
logo and
you,
everything.
thank you.
It's
Yeah,
great.
I painted after I did the first one. I painted that on the wall. I had to commemorate it.
Wow, wow. And this is just like a spare room you have in your home.
It's in my basement. Yeah, so it was like an extra room, like a little bit smaller than a bedroom, and so needed a spot for all my workout equipment and
Yeah,
weights and all that kind of good stuff. So kind of found this little spot it's actually where I work from home, a lot
yeah,
of the time, and so like half of it is work and half of it is that kind of work. So
yeah. Awesome, awesome. And do you normally do a workout in the morning when you get up early? Yeah,
yeah, I've always, if I'm gonna train, it has to be in the morning. I've got a busy job and I've got four kids, so by the time the workday ends, there's usually something going on, with
yeah,
one of the kids and taking them to a practice or that kind of thing, and so they keep me pretty busy. And I'm a morning person anyway, so
yeah.
I usually am up by 4:30,
Well,
and I'd like to get especially when you're training for Ironman, like there's so many hours, like
yeah,
unless you want to just like take up your whole day, starting early, allows you to get your training in and then still have kind of
yeah,
a good part of your day with your family and all of your
yeah.
many obligations that you might have.
But waking up at 4:30, that's like really early. I mean,
Yeah.
at what time do you get to bed normally?
Oh, I'd say when it starts to get to 9:30, I start getting really
Yeah.
sleepy, and I'd say by 10 o'clock, I'm usually in bed.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. If you get like 6 hours, I always feel like if you get less than 6 hours, I mean that's difficult with all the training and to fit at everything, unless you're like a superhuman like you are apparently. But
Not me. That's not me. No, I have to get at least 6 hours because I agree. Otherwise, you're just dragging, and it's just you can still exercise, but you're just not going to get you're not going to get the benefit out of it because you're going to be tired and kind of just
yeah.
limping through it.
Yeah, yeah, wow. Actually, we already like fully into the conversation, which is a good thing. But maybe we have to go one step back. I mean, it's
Sure.
really great, yeah, to have you on the show. This is just a little project that started recently because I just really love to hear the story of other people who finished an Ironman because I always feel like there's like a real story behind each and every athlete. And I came across your story on Instagram, and I was like, wow, this is like a real one. So I have to get in touch, and I just love that to see your room, to get to know other athletes across the world, and so that is really cool. And thank you for having some time for me today.
No, thank
And
you. I mean, it sounds like this is really. I mean, it's cool. It's amazing. What this is to me one of the great positives of social media. It's like without that, like I mean, there'd be no chance that I'd be talking to you across the world and talking about Ironman to between the two of us. Like I think it's really cool. So I really appreciate you reaching out.
yeah, thanks. I really have the same. I mean, there's a lot of bullshit about social media, and sometimes there's too much focus on the negatives, I would say. And if we get
Hmm.
back to the starting point, and indeed, how easily it is to connect with other people you would otherwise normally not get to talk to. I mean, this is just great to experience it like this. It's really low key and efficient. So that's I have the same experience. So that's awesome.
Awesome.
Do you mind just as a little start to give some background on yourself, like who you are, how you got into sports, and to have a little bit of feeling behind you as an athlete? Yeah.
Sure. So 45 years old, and really my kind of journey into endurance sports came much later in life. So a little bit of a background on me. Back about a little less than 5 years ago, in 2017, I lost a bunch of weight. So I lost 85 pounds, and really for the first time, kind of in my life, I'd always been kind of a heavy guy, and so really kind of at 40 years old decided to make a life change. And so spent 2017, losing weight and getting into shape, and better shape than I had ever been in, even including, when I was a young man in high school and things like that. And so then after I lost weight, I kind of looked around, and you say, okay, well, what's next? What do I want to do next? I was the right size, and so I actually ended up going. I was at lunch with some friends, and got challenged to do an Ironman, a full Ironman. And at the time, this was 2018, so I got challenged to do an Ironman in 2019. Now, keeping in mind, I didn't even know how to swim. This was like, the longest I had ever run was, I think, maybe a half marathon one time, and not very well. I hadn't really biked anything meaningful. But I said, sure, I was all confident after losing a bunch of weight. And and I'm the kind of person that once I commit to something, like, I'm not going to back out. And so I had a year and a half to train. And so I started, I kind of broke it up into pieces. And so if I was looking at an Ironman at the end of 2019, I'm at the beginning of 2018, first thing I did is, I went, and we'll probably get into some of the detail here around training, but, just went through and said, okay, I got to learn how to swim. So, got a coach and learned how to swim well enough, and then trained to do my first marathon, and did a marathon, and then trained to do a half Ironman, and did a half Ironman. And then in late 2019, I did my first Ironman Maryland. Just an amazing experience. And then, after that, I was hooked. I figured I would either come out of that either saying, okay, like, that was great, I'll never do that again, or I'll be into it. And so as we'll talk about, like, just got done with Ironman Florida. And so obviously I'm hooked, and I feel like this is like my thing. I like everything that goes, to me, endurance sports are great because they challenge you physically, but then, like, the benefits you get out of that are so noticeable in every other part of your life, professionally, personally, kind of outside of sports. And so that's really, that's kind of how I got here at a very brief overview. That's kind of how I've gotten from where I was to where I am today.
It's quite an amazing story, I would say. I should describe how many positive things came into your life as a result of this transition you apparently went through, and that it was not like, something all of a sudden, as you said, like, okay, I do it once in a lifetime, but it really stayed. It became a lifestyle. You got a new lifestyle which is sustainable, and I mean that's quite amazing. But was there a tipping point when you described at the point that you were a bit heavier, that you were saying to yourself, I do not want this anymore, I want to change it, or what, was there a trigger or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, the way I describe it to folks is, I think there's this stereotype that people, when they become middle-aged, in their 40s and 50s, people have their midlife crisis. And I kind of say that was my midlife crisis. I think, I was 40 years old, and you kind of looking around and you're having this existential moment where you're like, what does it all mean? And, what is life about? And so, I had been heavy my whole life, and I was like, I'm just tired of being heavy. I'm tired of being overweight. My pants were starting to fit tight. I was a size 40 at the time. And that was, for whatever reason, a line I just didn't want to cross. And so I was like, well, let me just, and I had lost, I'd lose 20 pounds and gain it back, and 20 pounds and gain it back. And so I was like, well, let me do something different. Let me really commit. Let me commit to a year and really kind of give it a go. And so it was just, the simplest way to say it is I just got tired of being fat. I mean,
Yeah.
it's there wasn't like a thing. I think it was just like a convergence of all of these feelings that you have kind of at the midpoint of your life, and so decided to, to me, I describe it as like when people have a midlife crisis, they can either go, they're at a fork in the road. They can go the destructive route, and just kind of, develop destructive habits or buy a sports car or all the other stereotypes that people do, and or they can, make some positive changes. And I went the other way. And so, and super glad I did, it was because I feel like the last 5 years since I lost that weight have been, it's a tremendously kind of positive kind of period in my life, and really kind of opened my eyes to like what's possible, and when you set goals and challenge yourself. And I think like a lot of people, like just had never really gotten out of my comfort zone, prior to that. So
was there a difficult part in changing the nutrition or the diet? Because I can imagine if you have 4 kids and you have a busy job, that sometimes it slips in through life, right? With comfort food, I mean, it's difficult to cook and everything. I mean, how did that go?
To me, I kept it super simple. So I'm the kind of guy, I can eat the same thing, 5 days a week. And so, I didn't want to, the harder part is less the, figuring out what to eat. It's really just having the discipline to say no, when your friends want to go have beers, or when, like you're at a gathering and someone says, here's a piece of cake or whatever. And it's having the discipline, just those little decisions are the things that add up. And so, I think everybody could kind of say, okay, like the healthy stuff, I'm eating a piece of, grilled chicken and some vegetables, and, not overloading with, a lot of starchy and, carby foods. It's like people generally know what they're supposed to do. It's just having that discipline to say no to the stuff that you're not supposed to do. And I think the other thing is like tracking your food for people who've never done it. And at the time I had never really done it. It's eye-opening when you really weigh and measure your food, and you kind of go, okay, like how much am I really eating? Because people will think, oh, I'm having a serving. Yeah. But when you really measure it out, and you're like, oh no, I'm actually having 3 servings or 4 servings, and and I think that's the other eye-opening thing that people should do, because they say, even like a serving of chicken is 4 ounces. I mean, most people think chicken is like, like a chicken breast, and so that's really like 2 and change. So it's just that kind of stuff. And peanut butter is another big one, where it's like those really calorie-dense foods. People are like, oh, I'm just having a little bit, and it's like, well, a little bit's 400 calories. It's like you gotta tune your brain to think that way. So that was I think the key to success, is tuning my brain to think that way.
It's spot on. I find it really interesting. Last year I started weighing my food just by creating more awareness, because literally I had no clue. My girlfriend said like, what is a normal serving for dinner? I was like, just guess it. I was like, I never had really thought about it. And then you just start weighing it, and it makes so much sense. And before that time, it was like, actually every day you're just doing something. You're just putting something on your plate, and it may be like, it can be off by like 30% every day, which doesn't make sense at all. And by creating that awareness, that's like the first step.
I totally agree. Yeah. So you know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm sure for you it was like, you probably were like eye-opening, like you kind of, you measure and you do all the math, and you're like, oh my gosh, like I had no idea.
Yeah, totally like that. And is there a guilty pleasure, something which you find hard to refuse, that you have like, once or twice a week, I really need this?
I will freely admit I do have a sweet tooth. I love desserts, and when people say, oh, it's too chocolatey or too rich, I'm like, I don't know what that means. I will have all of it. So yeah, to me, it's, so I try to find, ways to satisfy my sweet tooth and still have it be, reasonably kind of low calories. So, you can find like popsicles that are 100 calories, and it just gives you enough that you kind of like, you feel like you're having a dessert, but you're not having a 400 calorie or 500 calorie, thing of ice cream. And so, but every now and again, I'll, like yesterday was Thanksgiving here. And so, I kind of leave the discipline to the side, for a day, and then, you kind of just, like enjoy. And then the next day, today, you're back on track. And I've realized that for me, like I have to maintain some level of discipline. If I just kind of let myself go, I'll just gain all my weight back. And that's something I never want to do. So it's like, I have to check myself every now and again to make sure I'm staying, on track.
Yeah, interesting to hear. And if we look at your training, how your training normally looks like throughout the year, how would you describe a normal training week for you in the lead up to an Ironman?
Yeah, so I'm a big believer in like a slow build. So I will like for Ironman Florida this year, I started really ramping up very slowly at the beginning of 2021, and so and the other kind of dynamic with me was I started a job about a year ago that I was traveling every other week. So every other week I was on the road in a hotel, in a
Yeah,
different city, and so what I really tried to do was tailor my training to where I was going to be.
yeah,
And so, when I'm on the road, I don't have my bike. So I would do more running on the road and then maybe do more biking when I'm home, either on the training or outside, or excuse me, on the trainer or outside. And I would just start, a lot of Ironman programs will be like 6 months, for example, or maybe even shorter than that.
yeah,
And so I'll even kind of extend it a few months beyond that and just start slowly, building back up. Because after the last one, I kind of fell out of doing as much endurance and I didn't maintain it. So, start even just ramping up my running. So, you start out, you run 3 or 5 miles and you do that for a couple of weeks. And I find that for me, especially being older, I'm 45, like I mentioned, I don't want to push myself, to and then get hurt because then
yeah,
you're on the shelf. Or I've had friends that got hurt and they had to pull out of the race, and so
yeah,
whether those were I'm really conscious of avoiding injury, so I just try to
yeah,
slowly build. So I would mix in swim, bikes, and runs just at a very short distance, and then just try to do a little bit more each week.
yeah,
Um, and I would also not I would not be too rigid about what I was doing in a given week. And what I mean by that is, if the program calls to run this day and bike this day and just wasn't going to fit the schedule, as long as I was getting something in,
yeah,
at a reasonable distance, then I was okay. And I think one of the mistakes that I've seen people make is they get too wrapped up into like, okay, well the piece of paper or the program says I have to do this day, and
yeah,
it's like, well, but if
yeah,
that doesn't, like, if you're like, I think you should make training fit your life, not the other way
yeah,
around, And so if you have a family and a life, like you can't go, well, sorry, family, I have to go ride my bike for 3 hours.
yeah,
I can't go to the birthday
yeah,
party. Well, that probably is not the best decision, So
yeah.
just try to be flexible and get some work in. And that was kind of my
Yeah.
mindset as I trained.
It's a good approach. It's spot on, but it takes some time for a lot of people to get there, to that mentality and to have that state. And where do you struggle the most with in training?
For me, so swimming well, so I would point to a couple things. Swimming, I think, is something that I was never really good at. I mentioned before, I learned really to swim, kind of at 40 when I started training for my first one. So
Yeah,
I think getting in the pool, and because it's something that's not really something I was never really good at. It's not. I kind of have to force myself to do it. And improve it. And I still have a lot of work to do in terms of technique. So that's sometimes a mental struggle for me. And then running, I'd say, is another one where I kind of have to force myself to, like, I enjoy running up to, say, like I enjoy a 10K. I
yeah,
enjoy, even sometimes doing a half marathon, like, feels okay. It's when the mileage starts creeping above that, where you're talking
yeah,
15, 16. Those are long runs, and so
yeah,
it's a mental thing for me where it's like, okay, like I've got to get myself mentally in that place where it's like, okay, I'm
yeah,
going to go run for 3 hours, 3.5 hours, and that's
yeah,
that's the hardest parts I find is when you wake up and you're like, oh, I gotta go
yeah.
do that. So
And
that was the place that I struggled.
And in terms of recovery with long runs, I personally feel like I find it really difficult to combine the long runs and then the next day with a long bike, for instance. I just feel like my body needs quite some recovery if I run more than 2 hours. And if I run on a
Hmm.
Saturday 2 hours and I do on Sunday a 5 hour bike ride, my body isn't really happy. And sometimes I talk to runners who are like really experienced in running, and they say, like, "Oh no, I'm completely fine by that." And I'm like, "Well, I'm not yet
Not me.
there, not
Yeah.
me." Yeah,
But and that's why I would take Mondays off almost every week, and because
Yeah,
of exactly what you said. So Saturday and Sunday for most people who are training are like those are the heavy days, and so
yeah,
you're either doing a run one day and a bike, or a bike and then a run.
yeah,
And by Monday, to your point, like your body's just like, hey, like you need a break. And so I would always take Monday, and the most I would do on a Monday is like a walk.
yeah.
Some Mondays I wouldn't do anything and just just let everything recover and kind of ease back into it.
Yeah. And how is it to combine it with family? Because sometimes I also talk to people who say like, yeah, it's difficult to plan a really big day on the weekend because then I have some family obligations to do. So instead, I have to do my long run on a Thursday before I go to work. And then I'm like, okay, if you have to do a long run at like 5 in the morning for 2.5 hours and then have a desk job for like 10 hours, that's also quite tough. So
Oh yeah.
yeah,
So that's why I mentioned earlier, I wake up at 4 in the morning. So I
yeah,
would, even on Saturdays, I would still wake up at 4 in the morning, especially as you know, like late in the training when you're doing 100-mile rides, 80-mile rides. I mean, you're out there
yeah,
for so many hours, and so I can't, I could not rationalize killing my whole Saturday with my family. So I'd try to
yeah,
get on the road, and I wanted to be back and done with my ride no later than noon. That was like the
yeah,
absolute latest. So that way, at least the morning, okay, I would take that up, but I still had from noon till the rest of the day to do,
yeah,
get people to practice or just
yeah,
otherwise just be involved. Because, like I think it just doesn't feel right to me to kind of say to my family if they wanted to do something in the afternoon,
yeah.
hey, I can't do that because I got to go ride. Like it just feels very selfish. So I'm always trying to find the way to like get the me time in and training and then still, have my family obligations. And so the answer I've always found is just waking up earlier than
Yeah,
most people would want to wake up on a Saturday. And
yeah.
that's the sacrifice to get it done in my mind.
And do you still have energy after such a long workout to do things with your family? Because I feel like if I went for on a bike ride for 100 miles and then I have to think, well, I have like a kid's full of energy and I have a lot of obligations. I'm like, I'm smashed. I'm like, wow,
That's
respect.
true. That's the power of coffee, my friend. That is my solution.
Probably
It's
you have different coffee than I have.
It's just a lot. I just drink a lot of it. It's just volume. I just
uh,
keep the caffeine coming in, and I
yeah,
kind of live off that. Because you're right. Like, it would be very easy, and I've done it maybe once or twice, where like if we didn't have anything going on a Saturday and I bike, then like right around like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I'd go up to my bedroom. We didn't have to go anywhere. If I laid down, like I was out, and
yeah,
like because you're just so tired,
yeah,
because you've just beat yourself up for 6 7 hours, like your body just wants to sleep. So if I allow
yeah,
myself to lay down, like I'm gonna go to sleep. So it's either I
yeah,
don't allow myself to lay down, or if I do, I try to keep it short.
yeah. And is there a workout that is really your favorite? Like in the preparation of an Ironman, you're like, ah, this is a kind of workout like intervals on the bike or tempo run or anything like that, what you really love? Yeah,
I like the bike rides when you're in the part of your training where you're kind of at that like 50 to 60 mile level.
yeah,
I enjoy those because you can really like you're not as worried about pacing in the sense of like, oh, I've got to last for 100 miles. So like
yeah.
I can't I can't push too hard. So I like that level. I did an Olympic try during my training. So I did an Olympic
Mm,
triathlon, and that was a lot of fun because the distance
yeah,
is short enough that you can just let go, and you don't really have to worry about, because like the longer distances, it's about, you don't want to come out too hot,
yeah,
and you got to conserve your energy. If you're doing an Olympic or even a sprint triathlon, there's less concern. If you've got your fitness built up, then it's about having fun. You're still getting some
yeah,
fitness out of it, but I really enjoy those shorter distance type things because you can just really go hard
yeah.
and enjoy it. So those were kind of my favorite ones. And then yeah, because when it gets longer, it's work. Like
Yeah, yeah, it
yeah,
is.
I like being able to say I ran 100. Excuse me, I biked 100 miles a given day, but like I would never. I don't know if I'd call that fun because it's a
Yeah,
long day.
it's a long day. And
Yeah.
yeah, taking that into account, would you consider to do more shorter races because that's like more fun, more intensity based, maybe 70.3 as a longest distance? Because with 4 kids, family, full Ironman distances is like it's tough. And I get what you say. Like, yeah, Olympic triathlons, they are huge fun, so to say. It's more you can smash yourself, you can go a bit deeper instead of holding back, holding back, holding back. Yeah,
That's my plan for 2022. I plan to the most I'll do is a 70.3, maybe one, but I'll
yeah,
do some shorter races. I've decided that the full distance is something I will only do every other year.
yeah,
So I'll do 2023, I'll do a full 2025, and so on, and I'll keep doing that until my body says you can't do it anymore.
yeah.
But yeah, to that point, like it's so much work and it's so taxing. I can't do it. I just with my schedule, I just can't do it every year, and that's I feel like the right medium in terms of with my family and stuff, like being able to say like okay, because people, and I didn't make this saying up, but I've heard it and I think it's true. Like when one person in the family is doing an Ironman, everybody's doing an Ironman because
Yeah,
it
it
takes a
is.
lot of commitment. So I think that every other year spacing, and so next year I want to focus on getting faster, getting stronger, and I
Yeah,
think I can mix in those fun level races without being too worried about training, and sort of have kind of keep the fun of doing triathlon, but then
yeah,
work on other aspects. Really doing a lot of like trying to work on my FTP on the bike
yeah.
and some of those things, like the higher intensity type work. And so that to me is kind of the balance that works. I think will work for me.
Sounds like a wise decision, I would say. And where are you in terms of strength training? Are you in the camp, yeah, who focuses a lot on strength training, or do you find it difficult because some triathletes feel like, well, I'm only training if I'm swimming, biking, or running, and strength training always feels a bit in between. How is it for you?
I, you know, I will tell you that's an area that I feel like I've learned a lesson, and that is, I think I did what a lot of triathletes do for Ironman Florida, which is, at some point pretty early on, like I just stopped weight training, and all I did was swim, bike, and run. And I think that's a mistake, because what I've noticed is that your endurance builds up, but your strength goes really quickly.
Yeah,
And the evidence that I would point to is, I've been back in the gym lifting weights just a couple times since Ironman Florida, and I keep a little book with my workouts. I write my weights down and stuff, and you look, what I'm lifting now and what I was lifting, 9 months ago or 12 months ago rather, is very different. And
yeah,
you just, if you don't maintain it, you lose it. And I think it's being able to maintain it. And I also think that like functionally for triathlon, especially for, you think about kind of, the watts that you put out on the bike. I mean, yes, you can get stronger doing bike workouts, but like mixing in like a leg day, I think that has
yeah,
huge benefits. And so my lesson learned is going to be, in the future, as I ramp up training for 2023, for instance, I'll still continue to weight train at some level. I mean, obviously it'll be a lesser percentage, but I think it's important. I think there's going to be a lot of benefits to keeping some piece of that in your training, because it will have benefits, kind of out on race day. You'll be stronger. I mean, and not just legs, but and Ironman Florida is a great example. If I had been stronger upper body wise, maybe my swim would have gone better in the face of really tough conditions.
yeah,
Being stronger in terms of, my lats and my shoulders. I mean, I can tell you when I was on the bike after that swim, because it was so rough, I mean, my whole upper body was just jacked. I was
yeah,
hurting so bad. And I think, and I don't know, maybe I'm not right here, but I think if I had continued to kind of just weight train a little bit throughout the train, maybe it would have been a little bit better. Maybe it wouldn't have been as sore,
yeah,
So those are the kinds of lessons that I think I'll incorporate for the future to keep weight training a portion of my training kind of throughout the process.
yeah. And do you feel like that there is a part of your body that needs more attention in terms of injury prevention? That you feel like, oh, I need to focus on my hip area or my upper body, or is it something like that? Yeah,
Not so much for injury, I mean, because thank goodness I have not really suffered any major injuries, but I think I would like my legs to get stronger, particularly my quads and hamstrings.
yeah,
My power on the bike is, I'd say, okay, but I'd like it to get a lot better. So, I did an FTP test yesterday, and I'm probably still got some fatigue from Ironman, but it was It was harder than I remember it from the last time. And I mean, I'm sure you've taken FTP tests that they're
It's
not
hard.
fun. Yeah, those
They're
are
not.
those are really unpleasant.
They're
Um,
not. They're not.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's an area I want to get stronger. I want to get stronger
Yeah.
with my legs so that I can translate into more FTP on the bike and more
Yeah.
putting out more power.
I find those FTP tests, they are so mentally. I mean,
Oh yeah.
an hour before I'm already, I'm actually scared. I'm not looking forward to it. But I always know that after the FTP test, after 10 minutes, I'm thinking like, well, maybe I could have digged a little bit deeper. And then I'm frustrated with myself. But it's just massive. I mean, those last 4 minutes, I mean, it's like,
Oh
it's
yeah.
pure hell. It's pure
Oh
hell.
yes. That you go to the dark place in
Yeah,
those
you go
lows
to the dark place.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah. But you treated yourself to a sufferfest. I mean, like even after Ironman, you're still tough on yourself.
Yeah, I
It's
wanted to. I mean, as you know, like because we had to reschedule this, I was sick for like
yeah,
a week, so I didn't work out really at all for almost a week, and so I think I was getting I was I wanted to kind of push myself. So it's like because since I hadn't worked out for so long, and for me, I really like working out every day, and so I was like, all right, well, I want to do something hard, and I want to see where I'm at. So yeah, it was.
yeah,
And I got what I wanted. I
yeah.
definitely suffered for a little bit yesterday.
Definitely. And if we move to Ironman Florida, what were your expectations leading into the race?
Yeah, so I'll tell you, I felt really good going into the race. I felt like my training had gone well. I thought my bike speeds. I had done a sub 6 hour 100 mile ride, which for me was fast. And I'd really worked on that was a lot faster than I had done previously. So I had seen improvements in my bike. I had seen improvements in my run endurance. I had gotten my zone 2 running really dialed in, and I had a
Yeah,
system that really worked. That for me worked really well, which was for those long runs. I'd do 4 minutes running, 1 minute walk, 4 minutes, and I kept my heart rate down, and I felt like I could run for longer distances, after all of that other
yeah,
stuff and not be smashed. And so,
yeah,
and then my swims even were pretty good. I mean, I didn't really work on improving my times, but all in all, like all my training, I felt really good going into
yeah,
Ironman Florida, and even, I mean, heck, even down there, we got down there and we did some. I'd never done an ocean swim. That was the only wild card. I'd never done an ocean
yeah,
swim. We got down there a few days in advance and even, did some practice swims in the ocean and they felt great. The
yeah.
water was beautiful, it was calm. So I was like, okay, like
I can do
it's gonna be a
this.
good day. I was excited. I mean, I wanted, my goal time was 14 and a half hours. I had done Ironman Maryland in 16 and a half hours. And so I was like, and I was doing the math and I was like, I think that's doable. And so
Yeah.
and we'll get into the day here in a second, I'm sure. But, so my expectations were rather high going into the day.
Yeah.
And then the day happened, which I'm sure we're going to talk about.
Yeah, yeah. This is like the perfect lead up. And those days prior to the race, was it then not windy at all? Was it only on race day that it was like super windy? Yeah.
The day before, so we got down there Wednesday. Wednesday and Thursday were really nice.
Yeah.
Not super windy. Friday was rainy and windy. And so we were like, okay, but the rain's supposed to go away on Saturday, and it looked like it was going to be windy. But we didn't have it, and I don't know if it was just because we didn't understand how kind of the weather works with the ocean or whatever, but none of us were sort of thinking that the water might be rough.
Yeah.
Because every day up until then, like it was super calm. I mean, it was one of those rare beaches, like you look out on the beach and there's really like no waves. I mean,
Yeah.
super tiny. So you're like, okay, this is
It's
it's gonna
awesome.
be great.
Yeah.
It's gonna be super
Yeah.
easy. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, so there was no reason for us. I mean, it was the day before, but then the rain stopped, and we were, that morning it was cold. I mean, it was unseasonably cold for Florida.
Yeah.
So you think Florida, you think warm,
Yeah.
but the mornings were chilly, so kind of high 40 degrees Fahrenheit and windy.
Yeah.
But then it would warm up every day, and so we didn't have any reason to think it was going to be rough that day until it was.
And the day prior to the race, do you have like a ritual? Are you like a type of person who just stays in this hotel room on bed, flat down and sleep, or do you want to have some blood pumping in your body and do a last workout? Where are you there?
Definitely not working out. Somewhere in between, I'd say. So I think staying off your feet, but just kind of, so for me, the big thing is not a lot of activity, and I'm very conscious the day before about what I eat. So I don't want to have anything that has any risk of any digestive issues, or because if I'm ever, my number one paranoia going into a race is gastro issues.
Yeah.
Like I've never had it, thank goodness. But I think part of the reason is, so it's like plain grilled chicken, not a lot of seasoning, plain rice, like very bland, foods. And so it's staying off your feet and kind of just relaxing, bland foods. And then I go to bed super early. I think I went to bed at like 8 o'clock on the night before, because you're going to get up so super early. And so those are like my pre-race day rituals, just really rest and bland food. And that's my recipe.
And could you sleep the day prior to the race, or did you have some race nerves making it more difficult?
Surprisingly, for Ironman Maryland, I didn't sleep a wink. I was like up every hour.
Yep.
Surprisingly for Florida, I think maybe it's because it wasn't my first one. I think that helped a lot.
Yeah.
So I actually got a decent night's sleep. I think I maybe woke up once, but then I was up at, I think I got up at like 3:30, started getting my stuff ready and just kind of getting some coffee in and getting some food in long enough to digest and all of that. But no, I mean, I felt good even that morning, just rested and ready to go and excited but not nervous per se, but just excited.
Yeah. And in the morning, was the ocean still calm, or did the wind already pick up by then on race?
The winds were picking up, and so we got to the beach, and it was in the 40 degrees Fahrenheit ish. It was super cold, so everybody had their wetsuit on before they even just to keep warm. So wetsuits, sweatshirts, and so we're on the beach. So we're sitting there on the beach and we're saying, and then the announcer's like, yeah, there's a bit of a current out there. And you could see a little bit of chop, but you couldn't really, it's hard to see the current, and how strong it is. But again, we heard the announcement. The wind was blowing pretty good, about 15 miles an hour, was the wind. So windy and cold. And so it was actually, the water felt warmer. It felt warmer being in the water than on the beach, because the water was, at like right around 70 degrees. So it almost felt warmer in the water than it did standing outside on the beach dry, which was weird. But so yeah, but once the announcer said there was a current out there, we're like, okay, like, I wonder how bad this is going to be. But I don't think anybody knew until people got in the water, because the way Florida works is it's a two loop, and you actually come out and then you go back in. And so I think when I came, I didn't really realize everybody was having a problem until I came out and started asking people, because I was like, I got out and I was like, wow, like I don't know just what happened. And I know I'm jumping ahead here, but we got in, and it was hard from the get-go going out, but then particularly when we turned, we were going right into the current. So think you're swimming, you literally are looking up and you're like, I'm not moving. Because you're sighting off of a buoy or off of some kind of landmark, and we just weren't moving. So my first loop, because as the first loop cutoff is 1 hour and 10. Mm-hmm. I think I got out for an hour and I was in 1 hour and 6, and that's way slower than I've ever swam. And I was like, this is not good.
It's tough. Right, that's not good. What was the time you expected to swim in normal conditions?
Normal conditions. So Ironman Maryland, I did the whole swim in 1 hour and 40 minutes. So I expected somewhere between 1 hour and 30, 1 hour and 40 minutes, because all my pool swims were that way. My open water practice swims had been around the same speed. Yeah. So that was, my expectation was just same as Maryland, 1 hour and 40. And by the way, like in Maryland, there was no currents, but just to go on a tangent, the thing about Ironman Maryland, if you read about it, is the river is full of jellyfish. And when I say like full of, like, you're swimming through legions of jellyfish. Like every part of your skin just gets, I had more, I have a sleeveless wetsuit. So every area that had exposure was stung. And so your whole arms, face, feet, everything's stung by jellyfish, just over and over and over and over again. So in spite of jellyfish stinging you constantly, I still swam in an hour and 40 in Maryland.
Yeah.
So so like when I got out in Florida, and I was an hour and 6 minutes just barely doing the first loop. I thought I was the last one. So I asked my wife, she was standing there, and I said, am I the last one? And she said, no, I haven't seen so-and-so and so-and-so. So I was like, okay, well, maybe everybody's having problems. And so, when I went around for the second loop, I was just like, I was checking my Garmin, and I'm swimming. I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to make it. And I'm just hammering my arms, just like and going against the current, trying to get to shore. And I got out, and I was like, I didn't know what the timing was. I knew I was going to be close. So I'm running up the beach, and you can't get your footing. You're going up a hill in the sand. And then I crossed over, and it's a long run from the beach to transition. And I saw my wife. I'm looking around for my wife because I got to find out what my time is. And so I find her finally, and I say, what's my time? She said 2:20:11. So 11 seconds more than the cutoff. And I'm like, oh no. Like like at this point, like I'm hard, cause I know the cutoff. Like I know that's, I'm like, I don't know what happens now. And so I found out later that shortly after when I got out, they started pulling people's chips off. So 500 people got pulled from the race from that swim. They either got pulled out of the water or they pulled their chip. 500. So I got into transition. I was one of the last people. There's bikes everywhere. So there's so many people that never made it. I go into transition, and I said to my buddy, like, I said, I don't think I made it. He goes, well, did they pull your chip off? I said, no. He goes, just go. So I was like, okay, I'm going. So that was the swim. And I, at that point I had no idea if they were going to keep track of me. I didn't know what was going to happen. I was like, okay, I'm going to go until someone tells me to stop. And so I just kept going.
But isn't it weird because you were saying that it's a 2-loop swim, so you get out of the water, you have to run on the beach, but time is ticking then. So there you easily lose. I mean, in terms of distance, I mean, the swim is 3.8 kilometers. I mean, do they also count the distance you run on the beach? Because, in terms of those 11 seconds, that matters, right? I mean,
they do. They do count that. And so you're right. And because when you're going in there on the beach, it's crowded. So you can't and it's sand, so you can't run. Like it's very difficult to kind of move fast. So you're kind of like trudging through the beach to get back around. Then you have to, enter back into the water. And you know how it is, like when you walk into the water on the beach, like you're kind of stomping and like you're not really like, it's not like you just hit the water and start swimming. You have to kind of go where it's deep enough. So you're like marching into the water. So all of that slows you down 100%.
I mean, it sounds to me that your actual swim time is like within the 2 hours and 20 minutes. But if you take into account the run time going in and out of the water and the transition, you easily lose a minute or two.
Well, not just that, with the way that the wind blew the buoys out, most people come to find out, and myself included, their watches were showing that they swam longer than 2.4. So my watch showed 2.9 for example. Some people said that they swam, 5 kilometers, so like you're talking a little over 3 miles. So I mean, part of the problem was also people were being blown off course and like they end up swimming longer than they have to, and that's going to blow your time out.
Were people talking in the water to each other? Because I can imagine that a lot of people got so nervous because of the cutoff that maybe people were like in the water checking their watches. What should we do? Or was it not possible?
Not possible in the water. Where you heard about it was later on the bike. So you'd pass somebody and they'd say, how about that swim? And like everybody was just like, oh my gosh. Like and I talked to a gal on the bike. She's like, I've done Ironman Florida. This is my 5th time. She's like, I've never swam that slow. She's like, I almost didn't make the time because she's like, I was usually an hour and 15-minute swimmer. And she's like, I barely made it under the 2:20 mark. And just, there was so many people, and the pros even, I think they said the pros were 25 to 30 minutes slower than normal. So literally everybody was having trouble. So in a weird way that made me feel better because I'm like, okay, it wasn't just me. Like,
No,
because
no, it
when
wasn't.
you struggle with something, you're like I hadn't talked to anybody. I'm like, am I the only am I the only one having problems here? And
No.
so you realize everybody was getting beat up.
And could you swim freestyle? Did you have to combine it with breaststroke because it was so choppy with the wind?
So I stuck with freestyle. I come to find out later, and this is another lesson learned for me, is like, you know, the breaststroke or like also like going kind of on your side to kind of get through some of that. Like I didn't know any of that. So
Yeah,
I was just still kind of just going straight on
yeah,
and just kind of trying to brute force, push through it. And, I mean, to me, another lesson that comes out of this whole experience, and the swim is no exception, is like, I think a lot of people, they don't always, they train under nicer conditions than race day. And so, like if you're swimming and all your swims or most of your swims are in the pool, like that's not really going to be I
no,
don't care where you're doing an Ironman, like it's not going to be reflective of how race day is. I mean, there were some people there in our group that had never done an open water swim until that day. And it's like,
yeah,
that's a risky proposition. So what I'm going to try to do is do more like what I call kind of mix in more adverse conditions type
yeah,
training. So if I can get into some water that's choppy and like, do some rougher swims, or if I can, train in the rain, because
yeah,
races will run in the rain. Like I
yeah,
think sometimes it's easy to go, well, like, it's raining outside, so I'll do the trainer today. Or, you kind of like, cause it's comfortable.
yeah,
Like, and I mean, I learned my lesson from that day. Like I should do more training in bad conditions to get myself and myself mentally and physically used to, those types of possibilities. I mean, hopefully they don't happen, but
no, no,
good, good chance
yeah,
they
yeah.
will.
I mean, yeah, I completely agree. I mean, you have to train like you race, and if you're only used to sunny days and then it's raining, yeah, you don't know how your body's going to respond. You're not confident, and I mean, you want to, yeah, to rely on your body and to have already the experience that you are going to encounter on race day. So I agree with that.
And Mother Nature doesn't care if you're doing an Ironman. She's going to do what she does, and
Yeah,
and
she
you
does.
just have to
She
deal with
does.
it.
So actually, because it's really interesting, you got out of the water, you realized by your wife that maybe you did not make the cutoff time, but actually you weren't sure at all, and they didn't pull your time chip, and then you had to go on the bike, but in the back of your mind, I'm not sure whether I made it.
Right. Yeah, the whole time. And add to that, so we got on the bike. So I have all that going on in my head. You get on the bike, and it was so windy. I mentioned earlier it was windy that day, and so we had a headwind for the first 70 miles. So we were going into the wind for the first 70 miles, 15, 20 miles an hour. And so it's, if you've ever ridden into the wind, like, you'll be pumping your legs and you're looking down at your watch and you're like, I'm going 9 miles an hour. And like, I'm just hammering it. And so, it's demoralizing because like, and this is again, like I didn't train in the wind, and this is my fault. I should have done more of that because I was definitely not used to it, like the impact and how hard it is. Because it really kind of affects, like it tests you mentally, because you feel like you're doing everything you're supposed to be doing. You're pushing as hard as you can. And for me also, and again, kind of another lesson learned around adverse conditions, like, I think the salt water in my kit, I started like, it's going to be a little gross, but like, I was chafing really bad,
Yeah,
and like, this is just, I mean, but like, again, like lesson learned, like I had never done, salt water or really kind of, those types of conditions. And so it ended up being like, I couldn't, between that, the wind, my shoulders and back being jacked up from the swim, like I couldn't sit in aero, for very long. I'd get like, it hurt. I would like, and I'm uncomfortable in my seat. So I'm like upright. And so, so the first 70 miles like was just a miserable experience. And just, what was frustrating for me is like, I was so used to biking in ideal conditions. You're in your bike, your bike suit, and like it's like nice weather, and it's like I mean everything was kind of perfect conditions. So I hadn't ridden in rough conditions, so I wasn't used to it. So it just started like it was so much on my mind, and all the concern about not finishing or not, being tracked. I didn't even know if I was still being tracked. I was like, and you're out there on the bike, like there's no one to talk to. Like my wife's not out there. I'm not going to see her until after 112 miles. So I'm just like, well, I hope they're still tracking me. But I half expected like there to be points where someone would say, would stop me and like pull me off. I didn't know if I was going to get pulled off the course or whatever. So I was just like, I'm just going to keep going. But all this stuff's happening mentally, while I'm still going.
How did you deal with it? Could you leave it behind at some point that you said to yourself, okay, I'm just going to forget about the swim cutoff time. I'm focusing on my bike. I will just see what is coming. Or was it like a constant battle? Because I can imagine it must be extremely difficult. You've trained so hard for this. You finish this monster swim. You're on the bike in the wind. It must be horrendous to go through that and then asking yourself the question, well, am I doing this for whatever reason? Because maybe they just take me out. It's insane.
I think it got so hard on the bike, I started focusing on that. And so, I eventually blocked it out from the sense of like, okay, that's over now. Focus on this, just focus on getting through this. And, like for me, I got to the point where like I was, there was points late in the bike where I'm talking to myself out loud, just kind of like getting into these like recurring and just trying to like keep my attention focused. And I found that for me, like it sounds a little silly to talk to yourself out loud, but you do silly stuff when you're out there for that many hours. And so I would get into these rhythms and just, talk about, okay, like nothing you can do about that. Like just focus on the task at hand. And, and what I would do is I'd break up the mileage into like mentally bite-sized chunks. So I'd say, okay, I have, once I got halfway through the bike. So once I got after mile 56, I'm like, okay, halfway done. And then I'd get to like the next milestone. I'd say, okay, only 20 miles, or when I get 20 miles left, then I'd get to mile 100. I'm like, okay, 12 miles. And then I'd break it up and then like single digits, like 9 miles, 8 miles. And so like for me, doing that mental kind of chunking up and just focusing, okay, like get to if I was on mile 95, I'm like, I'll get to mile 100. I'm at 100, get to 105. And so like, I just focused very short term because I was hurting so bad. I was like, okay, I got to get to the next milestone for me mentally. And I just kept repeating that in my head and out loud. And that's what helped me kind of block out all the other stuff.
And were you still surrounded by a lot of other cyclists, which could also help you mentally? Or was the course like so empty because so many people were taken out after the swim?
It was pretty sparse. It was pretty sparse at that point. And so, because I had slowed down because I was in a lot of pain between that and then, a lot of people getting pulled off, to your point, it did thin the herd out. So, I'd pass there'd be somebody kind of passing me or I'd be passing them. And so you'd chat with them briefly. And like the gal I mentioned earlier who said she had done five Ironman Floridas, I ran into her like mile 100, and like it was just her and I kind of in that stretch, and we were just talking for a few minutes, and and most of the time when you were talking to people, we were all kind of just commiserating into like, because everybody was having a tough day, we turn and go into the wind, and people were like, oh, like more headwinds. And it's just like but I think you kind of feed off of that when you see somebody else out there. You see the other, and I think that's one of the things about race day that is so cool is like everybody's out there. We're all out there suffering, and we're all out there struggling, and it's such a positive environment. Like everybody's kind of so it's just someone will pass me and say an encouraging word, or I'll do the same, and it's those little moments I think help a lot too. I find the endurance community and the Ironman community is such a positive. Encouraging community, and everybody's just about like help, because we're all out there doing this, trying to do the same thing. We're all having a tough day. Like it's just so cool to have like complete strangers just kind of like say a nice word, or you do the same to them, and like it just lifts everybody up. I think it's cool.
Yeah. And when you wrecked your bike after those 7 hours and 10 minutes, was the feeling relief because the bike was over, or was it like I have to run now?
Surprisingly, I think under normal circumstances it would be the latter, but surprisingly it was more the relief. So
Yeah.
I racked my bike. I, got myself ready to run. I'm like, okay, you know what? Like I actually looked at it as like the hardest parts are over, surprisingly. Like in a weird way, I was like, I actually was kind of looking forward to the run because I started running. I'm like, I'm not hurting. Like I can run okay, and like I'm like all the chafing wasn't bothering me or anything. So I'm like, this is probably going to be shockingly my best leg.
Yeah.
So I started running and I actually felt pretty good, and I was able to keep my 4-1 rhythm, my strategy that I mentioned at the
Yeah.
beginning. Like it started working and it was working well. And I mean, you don't feel fresh, but like I wasn't crippled and I wasn't like, kind of debilitated. So I started going, and the nice thing about the course on the run is it's two loops, and the loops are really skinny. And what I mean by that is when you're coming this way, everybody else, the people on the other loop are coming this way. So you see everybody. So all the people that I knew, and then just all the people in general, you were seeing, even though they're either on their first loop and on the back side of it or on their second loop, like you're seeing so many people. So, I'd see my friends, I'm high-fiving them. And so like, it's also encouraging because you're not really out there alone on the run at any point, you know what I mean? Because it's such a tight loop. So that was really, really cool, I thought. And kind of a good mental pickup. And then there's people cheering kind of on all sides,
Yeah.
and they're playing music and they're dancing. It's like, I don't know any of these people, but like, you just kind of, you get a little something off their energy as you're kind of going through it. And so that helped a lot.
And with your run strategy, with the 4 minutes running and 1 minute walking, did you try to plan it that you could walk to 8 stations? Because I can
Yes.
imagine because you need that 1 minute, right? That you could drink and do something like that. Yeah.
I actually think it's really, really important, and this is what I did, and it worked really well, is I'll take something at every single aid station. I'll just take a little something because they have them so frequent that, and I never want to like load up and be bloated or like, and also, or like not drink something or not eat something and get behind. So I figure I have a little water, a little Gatorade, a little something to eat, not too much, and then I go to the next one, and then have a little something. So I did that throughout the whole course, so that I never overloaded and I never got behind, and that worked really well because I never cramped up. I never really felt like I was dehydrated, and it was just enough to kind of keep me, because they're every mile and a half or so. So it was enough to kind of keep me going.
Did you have a written nutrition plan in advance, or like that you were really focusing per hour, I want to take this in, or is it more flexible?
On the bike, I definitely have a nutrition plan. So I do Cliff Bars, which are about 250 calories, and I would do one an hour. So I did that throughout the bike. And then I would drink the Gatorade Endurance. And since they had that on the course, I would train with it. So I would train with the Gatorade Endurance, get myself used to it.
Yeah.
And then and on the run, the plan was just, I don't carry anything because I hate carrying stuff when I run, but it was really just that, what I mentioned before, just taking a little bit, at every aid station. And that's what was my plan. So I'm bringing in, and I would do more like calorie liquids than water. So, I wanted to make sure that like I was drinking Gatorade, Coke, Red Bull, like something with sugar, caffeine, like, electrolytes, and maybe a little bit of water, but mostly I wanted everything that I was putting in my mouth to have calories in it, just so I could just never get behind. So.
Yeah. And you did not have GI issues, no stomach troubles whatsoever.
No, thank goodness. And that's to me, like a big part of that. And I don't think I've seen people not do this. And I always kind of give my 2 cents is like, find out what, like they always publish what they're going to have on the course. So find out what that is. And then when you train, like eat that. You either need to eat that or drink that or what have you, or plan on bringing all your own stuff, which like that's harder to do. And so so that's what I did. I would train with what I knew they were going to have on the course. So like I know they have Coca-Cola, so I'd have Coca-Cola at home, on my runs, or Gatorade Endurance, like I mentioned. And so because then you don't have GI issues because your body's used to it.
On the run, I always see a lot of interesting things going on with people with a lot of upstream problems, like vomiting, throwing up, running into the bush, and like, the potty poppies are closed, and just putting the pants down It's like there's quite some distraction of the run sometimes with interesting events happening, I would say.
It's like a different universe, you know, like there's
Yeah,
like to your like all of those things you described, like
yeah,
in normal polite society, like that would be frowned upon. But when
yeah.
you're out there doing an Ironman, like anything
Everything
goes.
is
You just
allowed. Everything is
yeah,
allowed.
you just
Yeah,
see like you just look at it, okay, well, like I hope they feel better. Like we just
yeah.
keep on going because like it doesn't even phase you as weird, you know, which it would be in every other circumstance.
And when did the run mentally become difficult? Was there a switch? I always feel like after kilometer 28, so around kilometer 30. So what is it, 16 miles or something? I find it,
Yeah,
ooh, then it becomes difficult. How was that for you?
for me, I hit that point in around mile 21.
Yeah,
I walked 21 into almost 23. So those are the only 2 miles that I walked completely, and that was really because it was dark. It was the crowd was really light at that point, and so I was hurting pretty bad, and so like that was probably the toughest mentally during those couple miles, and then what clicked it back for me was, you know, a little after mile 23. It was far enough out. I mean, it still had, you know, 3 and change miles left to go, but the finish line announcer was loud enough that you could start to hear
yeah,
the guy calling the names, and like that just for me mentally, like okay, like I said to myself, look, just start running and run till you physically can't run no more. And so
yeah,
I just started running. It was funny because I started running, and just a little sort of fast forward story. So like my wife actually didn't see me finish because she was tracking me, and she was like, okay, well, if that's this pace, he'll be here about this time. Well, I ran the last 3 miles, which were fast, you know, like complete, like no run walk, just ran.
yeah.
Um, and you know, I was running 10-minute miles, and she was like, I didn't know you were running that fast. She's like, I turned around and then you were here. Like, you know, she's like, why did you start running like that late in the game? And
Yeah.
just mentally something came over, and I was like, it was hurting, but I'm like, I need to, like, because you just want to finish. Like you hear
Yeah.
that, you know, and then
Yeah.
you hear the crowd and all that stuff, and like you just like all the pain kind of melts away for a few minutes.
Yeah. Can you describe that feeling? I mean, the last 500 meters, if you take into account the entire day with the swim, the bike, I mean, what was going through your mind? How were you feeling those last meters?
I'll tell you, it was more emotional that I thought that I mean, it was certainly my first one that I did in Maryland was emotional, but this was actually more emotional because it was so hard.
Hmm.
It was so hard physically and mentally with all of the challenges that I had to deal with that day. So I think what was going through my head was like, you know, I kind of always, you know, I felt confident I was going to finish, but until you kind of get to that last stretch, like there's that little tiny part of you that doubts it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think for me, like I started getting a little emotional because I'm like, okay, it's like I'm gonna finish, and ironically, despite all those challenges, I actually finished 25 minutes faster than I did Maryland. So
Yeah.
you know, I was like, okay, I'm gonna PR and I'm gonna finish this thing, and I crossed the finish line, and I was sitting down with my kids, and my wife was around there, and I sat down, I just broke down, like I just
Yeah.
was crying, like,
Yeah.
and I didn't cry after Maryland, but I cried after this because and I think my daughter was like, well, what's wrong? And I said, like, all I could say was like, that was so hard, like it
Yeah.
was so hard physically and mostly mentally with all the challenges. Like I think when you cross the finish line, it's just like everything just kind of unloads, and you're like,
Yeah.
okay, like, and you know, you've been holding it in for so, you know, many hours that day. So that was like, it was a crazy feeling because it was just like, I mean, you know, you feel amazing and you feel like the sense of accomplishment and just, but I think it's just because so many challenges were thrown my way, like it was kind of amplified that much more as a result of that.
It's a huge achievement, and actually probably the reason we are talking to each other now, because I saw your finish photo on Instagram, and I was intrigued by that photo because I see a man who looks like very composed. It feels like you look like a soldier. You were a man on a mission, and you're seeing somebody who crossed the finish line in one piece. I mean, you could. There was a story behind. I find it. Yeah, I got a bit emotional when I saw it, and then I read your story with 11 seconds. I was like, come on, you can make a movie about this. I mean, 11
Yeah.
seconds. It's insane. It's
It was
insane.
it was it was so crazy, and it's funny because if you look on the Ironman page, like, and you scroll, like, it has all my times,
Yeah.
but then at the bottom it says did not finish. And
It's
so it has a finishing time. So I remember saying to somebody, I go, I got a PR and a DNF all in the same day, and so I was like, and and people have said, like, does it bother you that it says DNF? I'm like, no, because, like, I finished that thing, and I don't care if Ironman's app says that I was a DNF. Like, I finished it, and frankly, I'm more proud of this one than I am. I mean, I'm proud of both of them, but because of all of the hurdles for me personally that I had to overcome. I mean, everybody had a hard day that day, and everybody has their own, like, and so looking through my lens with all of those challenges and all of the pain and
yeah.
this, that, and the other thing, kind of having to deal with that, like, I'm having overcome that, like, I'm super proud and feel great, about that accomplishment because of it was that much harder than it would. There's no such thing as an easy Ironman, I think is the saying, but when you have those kinds of challenges, it just makes it, it makes you feel like that much more. And I think that's the emotional part that came over me because it was,
Yeah.
because of all that kind of build up.
Is there a tiny little voice in the back of your mind, that it bothers you about the cutoff time, or is it really like vanish? You're really at ease because, like you said, this is like a huge, huge achievement, probably even bigger than a normal Ironman. I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
done and dusted. Yeah.
yeah, I don't have any of that. I mean, I think, to me, I look at it as, are there things I could do differently and better? Of course, because I think everybody, and we've talked about a couple of them here, like, there's lessons to be learned, and I feel, very thankful about, like, being able to sort of, like the lessons I learned out of this one are going to make me better for the next one, and then the
Yeah.
next one, and the next one. And so it doesn't bother me because I'm confident. I can say with confidence that, like, I still consider myself an Ironman Florida finisher, and I, and none of that stuff bothers me. I wrote to Ironman and I said, hey, like,
Yeah.
are you guys going to do anything? And they never wrote me back, and that's fine. I kind of half expected them not to, but yeah, like, it was something that, I think it was in my head for a little bit, but then I quite quickly dismissed it and said, you know what, like, that it says my time right there at the top, and I've got a
Yeah.
picture of me crossing the finish line, and I've got a medal hanging back there, so I'm good.
Yeah, you're good. But still, I mean, that Ironman didn't even write you back if 500 people were taken out of the race. I mean, in terms of
Hmm.
organization, I mean, that's something. You cannot ignore that. I mean,
I
I don't
know.
know. I mean, you have to take the athletes seriously. And I was looking on the website of Ironman Florida the other day, and they explicitly say something about the swim cutoff time, which I normally do not see. And it feels like a bit like, okay, this is interesting because now they're really putting explicitly on the website now, yeah, if you don't make the cutoff time, you're out of the race. But yeah, if you look up Ironman Arizona, it's not like in bold letters in there. So I
Oh,
don't know.
really? I didn't notice that. That's interesting.
Yeah,
Wow.
I saw it yesterday because I was preparing this interview and I wanted to check the swim course, and it was like really huge, like a whole paragraph about the swim cutoff time, which I normally do not see. And yeah,
Hmm.
given that 500 people did not make it, who paid a significant amount of money, trained for it, and went to the race, it feels a bit like, I don't know. I mean, these circumstances were so special. Yeah, they could have done it differently in terms of communication, at least, I would say.
Well, and like, an idea I thought of was, to that point, like, okay, so you can't eliminate all your cutoff times, but if the swim is so rough, if people can make up time and still make the bike cutoffs, for example,
Yeah.
like, why would you DNF them? I mean, they're still making up the time, and obviously you
Yes.
have to have a window within reason. But, like, my example is a perfect one where you say, I actually made up time. I finished in just over 16 hours, so I had
Yeah.
50 minutes. I had 50 minutes to spare
Yeah.
before the final 17-hour cutoff. So, like, that to me counts for something. Like, I mean, I
Totally.
made every other cutoff downstream. Every other one, I was not at any risk of missing any of the bike cutoffs or the run cutoffs, and so, like, that's kind of, to me, the way, a way that they could take it into account, where you kind of, like, you almost waive the swim cutoff for
Yeah.
people who kept going and you kept tracking them. Like, and they finish under the time,
Yeah.
like why not give that to them? But
Yeah.
you know,
I mean,
they didn't ask me.
I'm looking at it like the swim cutoff time of 2 hours 20 minutes is set for normal conditions. These
Right.
were not normal conditions. These were like very extraordinary conditions in which 500 people did not make the cutoff. You only swam 11 seconds too much. Given that's nothing. I mean, that's a huge achievement, taking into account that even the pros took like 20 minutes more. I mean, yeah.
Right.
So I wouldn't be bothered with it at all. It's a huge achievement. I mean, finishing this race is so much bigger than going next year to some sunny Ironman event, do that in 14 hours something, and say like, oh yeah, I'm a finisher, everything is great. I mean, this in terms of the mental experience and everything, this race had everything. I mean, it was so difficult. But I was looking at on Facebook Live. I was like, these people are standing still, and at first I didn't get it. I was like, why are they're swimming so slow? And even the pros, I mean, 20 minutes for a pro. It's insane. It's insane.
Oh, I know.
So,
I know.
so
And what's
head off.
interesting is
Yeah.
Ironman Cozumel. If you read about that one of just recently, it was
Yeah.
the exact opposite. I mean, it was so fast. I think the guy who won, his swim was 39 minutes.
Yeah.
Like the currents were so favorable. Like
It blew my
complete
mind.
opposite. Yeah.
It blew my mind. I was thinking like, okay, the distance cannot be correct. I mean, how?
I know.
39 minutes. Oh man, it was crazy. It was crazy.
Yeah.
And how long did the recovery take after the race?
I stayed off of all exercise for about a week. I'd say and then I started, getting back into the gym. I'd say I'm still, and I didn't realize this, and people who I've talked to who are very knowledgeable have told me, like, look, you don't see it, maybe you don't even feel it, but like your body's still recovering, weeks later, which I didn't sort of fully realize. So I'd say it's definitely still happening. It's not like, I stopped being sore probably, the following Thursday. I could, I wasn't walking weird or what have you, or kind of limping along, but like my recovery from kind of subsequent workouts has been longer and harder. And then obviously, as I mentioned before, like I got sick after that. So for me, like it was a recipe. I mean, I shouldn't be surprised that I got sick. And someone pointed this out kind of like, and after they said it, I was like, well, yeah, that's obvious. But basically like I got off Ironman, flew home the following Wednesday, was home for a few days, then flew to Florida again for work, was there for a week, and then so it's like travel and working out and being around, like, and then recovering from Ironman. Like, I think, me getting kind of a cold was my body's way of going like, pump the brakes, like, slow down, buddy. So I'll get back into an exercise routine, and I just feel like, I'll just not do anything too crazy, from here on in. And I think, it'll still be probably a couple more weeks before I'm kind of fully back. But it's kind of like the recovery is happening kind of underneath the surface, so to speak. So, which, makes sense. Like, you're going through a taxing day on the fast end. Even the fastest of the fast, it's still an 8-hour day. And so like, then you got like the normal people, which is kind of like, in that, like, I think your time was what, like 11 hours. That's still a long day.
It is.
And then you go all the way to my 16 hours, like your body's going to get beat up, after a day like that.
I still have blisters on my feet. It's like 5 weeks ago. Yeah, they're slowly vanishing, but it's very well said that it takes some time. And I'm like, okay, 5 weeks later, still some blisters. Well, that's a sign.
Yeah. It's just like, because it's like without that, maybe you wouldn't notice it, but it's like, there's those telltale signs that are still there that kind of remind you, like, oh yeah, I did something really hard a little while ago.
It is. Okay, I think we have to slowly wrap it up. I'm always amazed that, we haven't spoken to each other, but it's so amazing that when you share the same experience, and like you say about the endurance sports, I feel like I could talk to you for like the rest of the day.
I agree.
That's that's amazing, but it's so interesting. I have two final questions left.
Sure.
first question is like, what's your biggest goal for next year? You already said something about 70.3, but what's your goal for 2022?
Yeah, so my 2022 goals are, to do races for fun, to enjoy, and really just do it purely for fun, and then get stronger. So I want to get my FTP up on the bike. I mean, I tested yesterday; it was 240. I'd like to get that up significantly, and probably, and then work on my run fitness. So probably do some distance runs, maybe do a marathon next year. And just try to improve my time. My best marathon's 4:45, and so I'd like to improve on that. So, just kind of working to get better without a lot of pressure around like a specific event. So really just take 2022 to improve, get faster. I want to focus on all of those things that I mentioned in terms of improvement should help me get faster at my next Ironman. And then the last thing would be, when I do start training again, is put myself in more kind of adverse condition situations, and really kind of get myself and focus on some mental training in that regard. I think that's another goal of mine, because I didn't do enough of that before, so I need to do more of that and really kind of put myself in tough positions that test me mentally and keep that part sharp.
Yeah, a lot of wise lessons, I would say that. It takes some time for a lot of endurance athletes to get at that point, at that stage, to have so much reflection and indeed know, the best thing I think you say is be flexible. I mean, make it work in your life. Don't be too rigid. Don't forget why you started with this at the first place, to have fun, to do something that helps your body instead of that it becomes so. Yeah, don't be too tough on yourself sometimes. I have a feeling. Okay, and then the final question is what do you think is the most frequent mistake that triathletes make in training, or when you look at other people that you feel like, okay, this is something I see happening so many times. They could do this better in racing or training.
I think the big thing is I would emphasize is something I mentioned earlier, which is, people train too comfortable, and they don't put themselves in, so the swim's a great example that I'll mention again. Like they'll do all their swim training in a nice, beautiful, heat controlled pool, but that's not reality. No Ironman's happening in a heated, temperature controlled pool, right? So, and there's been so many Ironmans. I mean, we talked about mine. It had windy conditions on the bike. There's been plenty of them that have been in rain, torrential downpours, and so, what I would say is, put yourself in uncomfortable position. When you've got to run on your schedule and you look outside and it's raining, get out there and run and do it and feel what that feels like to be wet and uncomfortable and cold and windy, and feel that and do that a lot. So I think a mistake that people make is that they think that they're training and they're doing this hard stuff and they're like, oh, I'm getting out of my comfort zone. And yes, but and I'm not saying every time, but mix in enough of adverse conditions where you're really kind of testing your limits, and your socks are wet and your gear's wet, and you're still having to keep going, and being on the bike, and when it's raining, how do you control, how do you deal with the tread and not falling? Because I've fallen on wet roads and it's not fun, but if you're not practiced on how to navigate that, so that's, I think, the biggest mistake that I see is people not doing enough of that.
Train like you race.
You got it.
That is it.
You got it.
Okay, awesome. Okay, thank you so much. I will.
Thank you.
Let's stay in touch. Have a great day, and thank you for taking some time.
No, thank you. Enjoyed the conversation, and we'll definitely keep in touch. I'm glad I have a new friend in the Netherlands.
Yeah,
it was nice talking to you.
Thanks, Dennis. Appreciate it.
All right.
Thanks for listening to today's podcast. Next time, we will feature another guest in our show and dive into his/her story behind time.